Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight we begin a journey into something vast, often unforgiving, and yet profoundly human. We're not talking about gilded empires or the grand pronouncements of kings. Instead, we'll gently step into the quiet, often uncelebrated rhythms of lives lived long ago. Tonight, you are not a ruler or a legend. You are simply you, drifting into a past world, unprepared for its unique demands and its quiet, enduring beauty. Before we settle in completely, if you find solace and curiosity in these whispers from history, perhaps consider a soft tap on the like button and a gentle press on subscribe. It helps these stories find more sleepy ears, and if you feel inclined, let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a quiet wonder to feel that connection across the globe. Now, if you haven't already, let the room grow dim. Perhaps the soft whir of a fan can serve as a gentle, consistent hum in the background. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's historical drift together. You open your eyes slowly, not to a sunrise, but to the muffled sounds of distant yelling, the rustle of unseen chickens, and the plaintive cry of a baby somewhere down an echoing hall. Congratulations, you have just awakened inside a Roman insula, the ancient world's answer to an apartment building. Imagine, if you will, a towering structure, perhaps 3 or 4 stories high, held together by what feels like ancient dust, whispered prayers, and a truly optimistic faith in questionable architecture. You're likely on one of the higher floors, which regrettably is not good news. The higher you live, the poorer the tenant, and the greater the likelihood that your ceiling might suddenly decide to join your floor, perhaps if someone above you spills too much olive oil. Your small room is no larger than a modest walk-in closet, its stone walls perpetually damp in summer and chillingly cold in winter. There is no proper window, only a narrow opening that allows in the barest hint of air, the occasional wisp of wood smoke, and sometimes a curious pigeon. Your mattress, such as it is, feels lumpy beneath you, stuffed with straw and almost certainly tiny, unwelcome residents. The blanket, thin and rough, carries the scent of damp wool and perhaps the lingering echo of past regrets. There is no furniture to speak of, no personal decorations, and certainly no kitchen. Cooking inside these buildings is strictly forbidden, for a tiny flame could ignite the entire structure, and the concept of modern fire codes is millennia away. Your few possessions amount to little more than a clay cup, a well-worn tunic, and, if you're feeling particularly extravagant, a simple wooden comb. And the toilet? Not in your room, not even in your building. Your chamber pot sits patiently in the corner, a silent, disapproving presence. Soon, you will have to carry it down the narrow, rickety stairs, navigating the dimness, hoping not to slip to empty its contents into the street gutter, a ritual you will repeat daily, adding your humble offering to the morning's collective waste. The walls, you discover, are paper thin. You can hear your neighbour's low murmurs of prayer, the rasp of a cough, a quiet argument with his wife, and regrettably, the sounds of him not arguing with his wife, if you understand the quiet implications. The very air you breathe feels heavy with the scent of smoke, the dampness of mildew, and the distinct, unwashed perfume of 1,000 closely packed lives. Downstairs, you can already hear the clatter of someone baking bread, but you are not invited. Outside, street vendors begin their morning cries, hawking figs and the less appealing fish guts. A distant centurion barks orders, his voice carrying through the morning haze, directed at someone who is likely already feeling the sting of a leather strap. You haven't even stepped outside your door, and you already feel a thin sheen of sweat, a creeping itch on your skin, and a vague sense of unease, perhaps from inhaling the lead dust that undoubtedly drifts from the plumbing. Welcome to your Roman workday. You're not an emperor. You're not a gladiator. You're just another fragile soul in an overcrowded tenement, striving to simply descend the stairs without mishap, or to avoid offending any of the myriad city gods before noon. And the day, dear listener, has only just begun. You have many more hours to navigate. Now that you've managed the precarious descent from your insula, avoiding the cracked steps and dubious shadows, it's time to address the second most urgent necessity of the morning, your bladder. Of course, there's no private bathroom in your tiny living space, no basin for washing, no flush, not even a bucket you could empty with any semblance of privacy. Instead, You shuffle out onto the cobbled street, your chamber pot held carefully in one hand, your sense of modesty, if you have any left, in the other. Your destination is the nearest latrina, Rome's unique interpretation of a public restroom, and calling it public is, perhaps, a generous understatement. It is, in essence, a communal club for strangers who have long abandoned the concept of personal space and who seem entirely comfortable making direct eye contact while attending to their most intimate needs. You arrive to find a long stone bench, punctuated by a series of circular holes cut into its surface. Beneath this bench, a shallow trough carries a slow current of water, just enough to gently transport the collective shame and waste of the city's lower classes away. You select a hole, if you dare, and settle down, hoping the person beside you has no intention of striking up a casual conversation. Privacy, you quickly realise, is not a concept that applies here. Doors are non-existent. People treat this space like an extension of the bustling town square, only with slightly more resonant acoustics. Businessmen engage in loud debates about grain prices, all while squatting. A retired soldier might regale you with tales of his sciatica, and you, dear listener, are simply trying to avoid looking directly across from you, where another man might be leisurely chewing olives, his gaze unbroken. Then comes the tersorium, a communal sponge attached to a stick, kept submerged in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. In theory, you are meant to rinse it before use. In practice, well, let's just say this sponge has borne witness to things, unspeakable things. You wipe hesitantly, a quiet prayer on your lips, hoping the vinegar has in fact performed its duty. If you were feeling particularly fortunate, perhaps you brought your own small rag. If you were truly affluent, perhaps some soft moss. But more likely you used what everyone else used, and now carry the quiet, shared shame of communal hygiene. And if, for a fleeting moment, you considered skipping this ritual by discreetly ducking into an alley, dismiss the thought. Public urination laws are enforced, fines are very real, and Roman law enforcement is not known for its subtle warnings. Once your business is concluded, you might think of washing your hands, but no. There is no soap, no running water, only a communal basin that has felt the touch of more fingers than 100 handshakes. You leave the latrina feeling lighter, yes, but also, perhaps, a little more dead inside. But that, you are beginning to understand, is just Rome. And now, with the morning's urgent matters attended to, it's time for breakfast, if you can truly call it that. You've navigated the treacherous paths, avoided the gutters, and somehow escaped arrest. Quite impressive. The entaculum, as the Romans called this morning meal, is less a feast and more a polite formality, a brief pause before the day's work and inevitable misery truly begin. Your morning repast will consist of precisely two things: stale bread and watered-down wine. On truly fortunate days, there might be a whisper of cheese or a few olives, but mostly there is just the quiet taste of disappointment. Forget the energizing kick of coffee, the Romans did not have it. No eggs, no bacon, no fluffy pancakes, and certainly no oat milk lattes. Breakfast, in this ancient world, is not designed to satisfy. It is designed to simply not kill you. Your bread, likely panis rusticus, is a rough, unyielding lump of grain and grit, baked perhaps yesterday or the day before. It is dense enough to serve as a modest weapon, and its texture recalls limestone. The wine is deliberately diluted, for even the Romans understood that being truly intoxicated before sunrise was a deeply ill-advised notion, unless, of course, you happen to be a senator. Since there is no kitchen in your humble insula, you will eat this meal standing in the street, or perhaps squatting beside a public fountain, alongside other equally unenthused citizens, all gnawing on bread that tastes like flavourless tree bark. If you possess a small cruet of olive oil, or a smear of garum, Rome's famously potent salty fermented fish sauce, then congratulations. You've added an aromatic horror to your already bleak meal. Should you be one of the truly wealthy, you might enjoy fresh fruit or a dollop of honey. But you, dear listener, are not. You're an average Roman citizen, just rich enough not to be enslaved, and just poor enough to envy your neighbour's slightly less broken jug of goat milk. Sometimes vendors might pass by, calling out prices for hot chickpea fritters or honeyed pastries, and for a fleeting moment a spark of hope might ignite within you. But then you remember your coin pouch. emptier than a gladiator's sympathy. So you bite into your bread, and in a quiet act of defiance, you pretend it is cake. This is how the day begins, with dense carbs, a mild sense of dehydration, and the growing realization that you're about to walk miles in Roman sandals, with nothing but stale crumbs in your stomach and a faint buzz from last night's leftover wine. It doesn't get better, for now it's time to go to work. After your hearty breakfast of bread and quiet despair, it's time to face the Roman workday. Let's be clear, unless you are a senator, a poet blessed with a generous patron, or one of the fortunate few who inherited land from a distant, airless uncle, you are working, and you're doing so with a quiet, grinding intensity. You might find yourself as a labourer, a porter, a potter, a bricklayer, or a street cleaner, or, if fate has truly dealt you a cruel hand, a sewer worker. Rome, this sprawling, ambitious city, has an insatiable need for things. Roads, aqueducts, temples, baths, and countless other structures. And someone, dear listener, has to build them. That someone is you, with your bare hands beneath the relentless Roman sun, wearing sandals that offer all the arch support of a damp leaf. The Roman workday begins early, very early. The sun is barely a pale suggestion on the horizon, but the foreman is already shouting in Latin, waving a stick. If you are late, you will forfeit a day's pay, or worse, face a public beating, public shaming, or outright dismissal, which, in Roman terms, is a quiet pathway to starvation with a modicum of honour. Your tools are rudimentary. You might dig with a shovel made of splinters and desperation, carry heavy bricks on your aching back, or haul water from a cistern that smells faintly of old socks and the unspoken dreams of the working class. There are no gloves, no helmets, just the constant sting of sweat in your eyes, the gritty dust on your skin, and the ever-present awareness that one misstep could simultaneously crush your spine and your career. If you are a craftsman, your struggle is a different one. You compete with hundreds of others, all selling the same clay pots, the same simple sandals, or the same coarse tunics. Underpricing is rampant, and quality often matters little if a wealthier citizen decides for no discernible reason that they simply do not like the look of your face. Even the seemingly more elevated jobs, messenger, accountant, teacher, offer little glamour. You might be running through Rome's chaotic streets with a roll of scrolls tucked under your arm, or diligently writing numbers for someone who will instantly forget your name, or perhaps trying to teach Latin to a group of senators' children who already believe themselves to be minor deities. Women too are working, spinning wool, weaving cloth, selling vegetables, or managing stalls in the bustling markets. All while raising children, managing the demanding rhythm of a household, and striving against immense odds not to die during childbirth. This is multitasking long before the word was conceived. After all this, you might, if your supervisor is not in a foul mood or attempting to impress a visiting prefect, receive a short break for lunch. So yes, dear listener, you work, or you die trying. Rome may be eternal, but your back, you realise with a quiet ache, most certainly will not be. You've made it through the morning without succumbing to the heat or to the sting of a lash. Now, it's time to navigate the ancient Roman street. Imagine it as a chaotic, crowded gauntlet, seemingly designed by someone who harboured a profound dislike for both personal space and public health. Picture it. The sun is high, a golden haze hangs in the air, and the city hums with a buzzing, visceral energy. Not in a poetic, romantic way, but in a literal, teeming way. Rats scurry, flies buzz, stray dogs wander, livestock bleat, beggars plead, merchants yell in a symphony of 6 languages, children run wild, and thieves, with practised ease, pretend to assist old ladies while deftly slipping your coin purse into their own pockets. It is perhaps like Times Square, if Times Square possessed no plumbing and every other person carried a goat. Let's consider the infrastructure. Roman roads were, indeed, engineering marvels, perfectly straight, masterfully paved with interlocking stones, and more often than not overflowing with a rich, aromatic blend of human urine, spilled wine, discarded vomit, various animal wastes, and the lingering, pungent remains of last night's garum sauce. The very middle of the street often serves as an open sewer. Step off the raised footpath without looking, and congratulations, you have just baptized your sandal in the holy waters of human misery. Wagons clatter by with no speed limits, no crosswalks, and an utter lack of caution. They do not stop for pedestrians. In fact, Roman law, in a peculiar twist, actually banned heavy cart traffic during the daylight hours within the city, which meant drivers would race through the narrow streets at night, in the dark with no brakes, like charioteers on a desperate deadline. If you're not crushed by the wheels, you will be jostled by elbows, bumped by overflowing baskets, or perhaps accosted by an angry fishmonger shouting about his spoiled eels. And then there is the air itself, thick with smoke from countless cooking fires, the sweet, heavy scent of incense drifting from temples, and the unmistakable, pervasive aroma of public latrines wafting on the breeze. Oh, and dead animals. Sometimes people simply leave them where they fall. If a dog collapses in the forum, someone might simply toss a cloth over it and walk away, leaving it to its quiet decay. And let us not forget the public spectacles. Spontaneous brawls erupt, impromptu protests block pathways, or a politician's parade might suddenly materialise, bringing traffic to a standstill for hours while trumpet players blast off key fanfare directly into your face. So yes, the Roman street is alive, and it often feels very much out to get you. Slip on a discarded fig, get clipped by a runaway cart, or accidentally offend a patrician's pet monkey, and your day could end faster than Caesar's on the Ides of March, and all you were trying to do was buy some lentils. You're sweaty, dusty, and desperately craving a splash of something cold. The good news, you live in Rome, a city justly renowned for its aqueducts, those magnificent engineering marvels that channel fresh, clear water from distant hills directly into the beating heart of the empire. The bad news, that water, in its pristine journey, doesn't particularly care about you. Unless you are fortunate enough to reside in a sprawling domus with your own private fountain, you will be sharing water with thousands of your closest, coughing, sneezing, and often unwashed neighbours. Your options are the public fountains, where everyone fills their jars, washes their feet, and occasionally, with a surprising casualness, dunks a child for a quick splash of hygiene, or what passes for it. If you truly wish to wash yourself, your best option is the thermæcans, the Roman public baths. They are ubiquitous, and everyone uses them. Sounds civilized, doesn't it? But here's the reality. The water cycles through multiple pools, without soap, without chlorine, and with very little concept of privacy. You will find yourself immersed in a tepid bath with a dozen other men, none of whom seem to believe in modesty. Conversations are loud, often political, and occasionally disturbingly naked. A man might attempt to sell you socks while another meticulously cleans his ears with a stick. And the water itself, it has by this point been through everyone. If you are hoping to feel truly clean, think again. You are, in essence, marinating in a warm broth of bacteria with a faint hint of eucalyptus. Also, a cheerful historical fact. The plumbing system often utilised lead pipes. Yes, lead. The Romans were obsessed with engineering, but less so with chemistry. Over time, that convenient indoor plumbing could lead to all sorts of delightful side effects such as anemia, gout, infertility, and if you were truly fortunate, madness. Do you wish to drink something safer? Wine? Seriously. Water, especially in the poorer districts, was viewed with deep suspicion, as contaminated from latrines and street runoff. So, wine is diluted and consumed throughout the day by men, women, and even children. Because what better way to navigate a crumbling empire than with a gentle, consistent buzz? So yes, Rome brought water into its city before much of the world understood what a pipe was. But for the average citizen, it was a gamble every time you drank, bathed, or even simply rinsed your toes. Enjoy your aqueducts, just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't merely a possibility, it is quite literally the constant low-frequency background music of your entire existence. You stubbed your toe. No ice, no painkillers. You simply grit your teeth, perhaps mutter a quiet curse to the gods, and keep going until it either heals incorrectly or, in some unfortunate cases, simply falls off. Break a bone, you wrap it in a dirty rag, hope for the best and try not to breathe too hard. Get a splinter, good luck. That, in this world, is precisely how a small infection begins and how your life might regrettably end. Roman society is not designed for comfort. There are no ergonomic tools, no padded seats, no gentle concept of taking it easy. If you are a labourer, you're lifting bricks with a hernia and a quiet prayer. If you're a soldier, you march 20 miles a day with bleeding feet and, perhaps, the venomous sting of a scorpion bite on your thigh. If you are a woman in childbirth, well, welcome to agony. Your midwife might know a soothing chant. That, dear listener, is about the extent of your medical intervention. Every part of your fragile body is one misstep away from becoming an open wound or a grim cautionary tale, and unless you live near a temple with a particularly dedicated priest, your best option is homemade ointments, the inhalation of herbal smoke, or the stoic act of simply ignoring the problem until it either resolves itself or you are quite literally resolved into a grave. There is no such thing as anesthesia. Surgeries, when they occur, are performed while you scream silently into a block of wood. A dislocated shoulder, it is popped back into place by a man named Marcus, who, it is whispered, learned the technique by watching someone else fail at it. Dental work, picture a blacksmith. Now, picture your mouth. That, dear listener, is the scene, and if you are enslaved or poor, people do not even pretend to care. You could be bleeding out on the side of the road, and the best you might receive is a curt instruction. Don't stain the mosaic. Even upper-class Romans, in their own way, embraced pain as a strange proof of virtue. Stoicism was the prevailing philosophy of the day. Enduring suffering without complaint was seen as noble. If you cried over a broken arm, you were not just in pain, you were weak. Real Romans, it was believed, suffered silently. Then perhaps they write poetry about it later. So, yes, pain is always on the table, and it usually arrives without warning, without remedy, and most certainly without sympathy. On that cheerfully sombre note, let's consider what happens when you actually seek the help of a Roman doctor. You've injured yourself. Perhaps it's the angry, infected blister from yesterday's toil, or perhaps you attempted to shave with a dull bronze blade, and now your chin resembles a gladiator training ground. Either way, it's time to seek medical attention, which in ancient Rome was less about genuine healing and more about simply surviving the attempt. Let's begin with the fundamentals. Roman medicine is a chaotic blend of inherited Greek theory, profound mystical guesswork, and a surprising abundance of leaves. The core belief system revolves around the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling unwell, one of them is out of balance. The solution? Drain something. So your doctor, who may or may not also be your barber, immediately reaches for the leeches or a small sharp knife, because bloodletting, it seems, is the default treatment for everything, from a nagging migraine to a moral failing. Have a cough? Let's open a vein. Feeling melancholic? We'll just drain some sadness out of your arm. Surgery? Oh yes, it exists. Roman surgeons possessed scalpels, forceps, and even bone drills. What they decidedly did not have were anaesthetics. You remained fully conscious throughout the entire procedure, gripping the edge of a wooden table, your knuckles white, while a man in a dirty toga meticulously digs into your flesh with the unsettling confidence of someone who once, perhaps, skimmed a scroll about it. Antiseptics. Not really a concept. They might wash wounds with wine or vinegar, which does offer some benefit but also burns like a divine punishment. Infection is not merely a common side effect. It is almost an inevitability, as is death. Prescriptions vary wildly. You might be given a spoonful of honey, a clove of garlic, a concoction of crushed beetles, or a poultice made of herbs, ash, and very specific types of animal dung. If your condition worsens, you are advised to sleep in a temple, pray fervently to Asclepius, the god of medicine, and hope that divine dreams will deliver your cure. And if none of it works, well, your doctor simply shrugs, your family quietly lights a candle, and your neighbours begin to whisper about what kind of ominous omen your death might portend. It is not that Romans didn't care about health. They simply hadn't quite figured out what truly helped and what merely murdered you more efficiently. So, the next time you sneeze, dear listener, be grateful for modern antibiotics and for the fact that you do not live in a world where healing often begins with deliberate blood loss. After a long day of sweating, perhaps bleeding, and certainly dodging runaway carts, you are understandably starving. It is time for dinner, or as the Romans called it, cena. Just do not expect anything remotely comforting. Let's begin with what you will not find on your table. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no chocolate, no refined sugar, and absolutely no coffee. None of these things had yet been discovered or imported into the Roman world. This, you realise with a quiet sigh, is not Italian cuisine. This is pre-Italian Italy, focused on edible survival. You sit down to a wooden bowl containing something vaguely brown and tepidly hot. It is most likely pulse, a porridge made of spelt, or perhaps beans or lentils. It tastes, you find, like wet gravel, with a faint hint of herb if you are fortunate. If you are not fortunate, it tastes precisely like wet gravel, without the herb. Protein is a rare commodity, unless you yourself caught it, trapped it, or fished it from the Tiber. Meat is prohibitively expensive, and even when you do obtain some, it is often on the verge of spoiling. Roman cooking did not utilize refrigeration, so preservation relied on heavy salting, smoking, or most commonly marinating it in garum, that infamous fermented fish sauce that smells faintly of dead ocean and burns your very soul just contemplating it. If you're feeling particularly festive, there might be a few boiled vegetables, a slice of hard cheese, or the occasional fig. Rich Romans, of course, dined on exotic dishes like roasted flamingo, stuffed dormice, or jellyfish in vinegar, delicacies that primarily serve to loudly proclaim, "Look how rich I am, and how little I care about my taste buds." Your wine, as always, is watered down. Drinking it straight is considered barbaric. But do not worry, the water with which it is mixed is probably questionable too, so you're merely choosing the speed at which you wish to risk getting sick. Dessert? Perhaps some dried fruit, perhaps a handful of nuts, or perhaps you are fasting because it is a feast day honouring a god who frowns upon gluttony. Either way, you will not be ending the night with a tiramisu. There are no napkins. You wipe your hands on a shared cloth, used by 10 other people, or simply wipe them on your tunic and pretend it is clean. By the end of the meal, your stomach is full but unsettled, and your breath carries the lingering scent of garlic, wine, and a quiet, creeping despair. But at least you are fed. Now, all you have to do is survive the Roman nightlife, and trust me, dear listener, that is not a relaxing stroll. After a long day of grime, toil, and the lingering taste of fish sauce, you might be hoping for a little leisure, something to take your mind off your quietly crumbling apartment and the open sewer outside. Well, the good news is you are in Rome, where entertainment is ubiquitous. The bad news is that most of it is quietly horrifying. Let's begin with the main event, the Colosseum, the undeniable crown jewel of Roman engineering, and the place where your soul, you suspect, quietly dies. This is where vast crowds gather to watch men stab each other for sport. Wild animals, often starving, devour criminals, and sometimes, if the emperor is feeling particularly dramatic, full naval battles are reenacted, with real water and, inevitably, real drowning. It is free to attend, which sounds generous until you realise it is free because the state desires you to be thoroughly distracted, while the Senate quietly raises taxes and annexes another distant province like Armenia. You sit packed between sweaty strangers, cheering almost instinctively as a gladiator loses a limb. There is the pervasive scent of blood and sand and the occasional public execution, performed with extra theatrical flair. You find yourself clapping. You're not entirely sure why, feeling a little too sensitive for such brutality. Perhaps you prefer the theatre. Head to the amphitheatre for a Roman play. It might be a tragedy, performed in Latin you barely comprehend, or a crude farce where the punchline involves someone pretending to defile Jupiter with a sausage. Subtlety, you quickly learn, is not a Roman strong suit. If you're feeling sporty, try the Circus Maximus. Chariot races are fast, thrilling, and regularly fatal. There are no guardrails, no helmets, and an abundance of shouting. Crashes are inevitable and spectacular, and the crowd, you observe, loves it. They're here for the violence, yes, but also for the betting. Do not cheer for the wrong team, unless you are prepared to fight your way home. And then there is the vibrant, often unsettling street entertainment. Fire breathers, acrobats, street musicians whose instruments seem perpetually out of tune, con artists with practiced smiles, and the occasional philosophical rant from a barefoot man who seems to have nothing left to lose. If you don't like the current show, simply wait 5 minutes. Something else, or someone else, will inevitably start yelling. But behind all of this, there is a strange, unsettling brilliance. Rome didn't just distract its people, it dazzled them, hypnotized them into momentarily forgetting how truly brutal daily life was. It weaponized spectacle. And if that doesn't numb you enough, dear listener, there is always more wine. Now let's take a walk through justice, Roman style. Spoiler alert, it is not comforting. You've survived work, a meagre dinner, and witnessed a gladiator being impaled to raucous applause. You might think you are safe now. that as long as you keep your head down, the law will protect you. Ah, that's almost adorable. In Rome, the law does not primarily protect. It reminds you. It reminds you that you are small, that you are replaceable, and that mercy is a luxury reserved for the unfeeling statues of emperors. First, legal status matters. If you are a citizen, you possess rights. In theory, you cannot be publicly flogged unless someone truly important becomes profoundly annoyed, and you are, in theory, entitled to a proper trial. If you are a non-citizen, however, justice often arrives in the form of a swift fist, a branding iron, or a brisk execution outside the city gates. Slaves, you observe, are property. If a slave murders their master, even if the master by all accounts richly deserved it, every slave in that household might be executed simply to send a chilling, unmistakable message. Don't even think about it. If you are accused of a crime, do not expect a calm chat with a lawyer. Trials are a public theatre. The wealthier party will bring witnesses, bribes, and dramatic gestures. You, dear listener, bring your worn tunic and a sinking feeling. If you can cry on cue, that might help. If you have no patrons, pray to Jupiter and hope the magistrate is not hungover. Punishments are designed not merely to inflict pain, but to deter. Thieves might be branded or have their hands deliberately broken. Liars might endure their tongue being pierced. Fraud could result in public flogging or, if you are exceedingly lucky, exile. And if you insult the emperor, it's not jail time. It is death, usually quite creative. Some crimes require public punishment, ideally in front of a cheering crowd that roars louder than they did for the morning's beheading. Crucifixion is a particularly popular choice, long, slow, and utterly humiliating. It is not, as some might think, reserved just for Jesus. It is the go-to punishment for rebels, robbers, and anyone the state wishes to make a truly unforgettable example of. And remember, law enforcement is not there to help. The vigils are Rome's version of firefighters and police, underpaid, overworked, and often deeply corrupt. If you are mugged, they might simply shrug. If you bribe them, they might perhaps help you mug someone else. So yes, Rome possesses laws, meticulously carved in stone, recited in forums, but they serve power, dear listener, not justice. Now let's talk about gods. Because you are not just obeying men here, you are quite literally on Jupiter's turf. After surviving the bewildering streets and dodging Roman justice, you may hope to find a quiet comfort in religion. A little peace, a touch of personal spirituality. Nope, not here. In the Roman Empire, religion was not a private affair. It is an immense, all-encompassing institution, an ever-present cloud of incense and obligation, wrapped tightly around every waking moment of your life. You do not choose your gods. They, it seems, choose you. And there are so many. There is a god for everything: door hinges, cardia, sewers, cloacina, boundaries, terminus, and even mildew, robigus. You cannot walk 5 paces without crossing a shrine, a small altar, or a painted niche. If you fail to pause and bow, light a small candle, or mutter a brief prayer, you're not simply being rude. You're inviting catastrophe. Perhaps not today, but eventually. And when your roof inevitably collapses, everyone will nod knowingly and say, "Ah, yes, he skipped the Saturnalia offering." Religious festivals saturate the calendar, dozens each year. On these days, business ceases, animals are sacrificed, and the air hangs thick with the scent of roasting bull and wet marble. You attend out of piety, yes, but also out of a very real, very pragmatic fear. Because if the gods are not honoured properly, they will retaliate with plagues, prolonged droughts, or a truly disastrous harvest that ruins everyone's precious lentil supply. Now let's talk about emperor worship. The state desires you to revere the emperor not merely as a ruler, but as a living god. You are expected to offer incense at his altar, to sing his praises, and never, under any circumstances, to roll your eyes during a triumphal procession. That, dear listener, is treason adjacent. If you are caught not participating in public worship, say you are a little too quiet during the Vestalia, or you do not show up to toss grain into the temple flame, you could be labelled impious, atheistic, or, worst of all, suspicious. Suspicion in Rome is like blood in shark-infested waters, and if you are part of a foreign cult, you had best keep that under wraps, unless it has received official state approval. The state, you see, does not favour unfamiliar gods, unless they bring with them wine, additional taxes, or new soldiers. Roman religion is not truly about belief. It is about ritual. You do not have to feel it. You just have to do it correctly, on time, and in public. And you had better smile while you sacrifice that goat. Speaking of social performance, let's gently climb the greasy pole of Roman ambition in the next chapter of your quiet day. You've bowed to the gods, somehow avoided a lawsuit, and even survived a public bath without contracting something mythical. But here comes perhaps the most exhausting part of Roman life, the social hierarchy. It is a brutal, finely tuned machine where every carefully chosen word, every subtle gesture, and even the placement of a sandal strap could either elevate you or utterly break you. Roman society is indeed a ladder, but it is covered in oil and discreetly lined with hidden daggers. At the very top are the senators, old money, toga-clad figures with luxurious purple stripes, and land ownership so vast it seems to have its own postal code. Below them, the equestrians, the wealthy business class, riding horses to signify their status. Then come the plebeians, like you, dear listener, the struggling middle and lower classes attempting to carve out a meagre existence. Below that, freedmen, then slaves, foreigners, and finally the unfortunate soul who once accidentally insulted a statue of Augustus. Do you wish to move up? You will desperately need patrons, powerful individuals who offer protection and small favours in exchange for your lifelong loyalty, the running of endless errands, and the occasional crucial vote. It is like having a boss, a godfather, and a landlord all rolled into one charmingly condescending package. Each morning, you visit your patron's home as part of the salutatio ritual. You wait patiently in line with other clients, praise his haircut, perhaps compliment his son's toga, then quietly beg for a favour, usually a small coin, a bit of food, or a crucial recommendation. If you are lucky, he tosses you a coin and allows you to carry his litter through the forum. Congratulations, you are now connected. Every move you make is watched, and every action judged. Your clothes must be clean, not fashionable, simply clean. Your speech must be proper, and our friends carefully selected. And whatever you do, do not under any circumstances openly display ambition. That, you see, makes people nervous. If you rise too quickly, others will conspire, subtly or not so subtly, to knock you back down, socially or quite literally physically. Networking is a form of quiet warfare. Gossip is currency. The wrong comment at a banquet can end your career. The right marriage can save your entire bloodline. But you must play it carefully. Love, you realise, is for poets. The rest of Rome marries for alliances and access to estates. And even if you manage to climb high, do not get too comfortable. One bad harvest, one missed ritual, one jealous rival, and it is all over. You will not even hear the dagger coming. Now, as the sun begins its slow descent over the rooftops of Rome, you might think, maybe now, finally I can rest. But nightfall in the Roman Empire is not a time for peace. It is a distinct shift in tone, from noisy and chaotic to something darker, louder, and downright lethal. First, let's consider lighting. There isn't any. Unless you are wealthy enough to burn precious oil lamps all night, and very few are, most people rely on the pale gleam of moonlight, the familiarity of memory, and a good deal of blind hope to find their way through the labyrinthine alleys of the city. If you trip and fall, no one is helping. They might just take your shoes. The vigils, Rome's official night watchmen, are theoretically supposed to patrol the streets, prevent fires, and stop crimes. In practice, they are overworked, underpaid, and often more interested in snatching a quiet nap than performing heroics. Some are brave, most are bribbable, and all of them are severely outnumbered. Criminals, you discover, know this. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional bored ex-gladiator roam the shadows looking for easy marks. If you are walking home alone, you are, quite simply, the easy mark. It does not matter who you are. Unless you are armed, remarkably fast, or somehow invisible, you are at significant risk. And then there is fire, Rome's greatest nighttime terror. Insulae, those charming multi-story death trap apartments you sleep in, are constructed primarily of wood and the fragile dreams of their inhabitants. Cooking after dark is illegal for this very reason, but laws mean little to a hungry tenant. A single overturned oil lamp can reduce an entire block to ash in a matter of hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE did not spontaneously ignite itself, but once it began, it raged like Mars himself in a bad mood. You might think your building is safe, until you smell smoke at midnight and realise there is no organised evacuation plan. You grab your one tunic, your chamber pot, and perhaps a sliver of your dignity, and sprint for your life down a collapsing staircase. And if it is not fire or thieves, it is the noise. Drunken parties echo through the narrow streets. Processions for obscure gods parade by with pounding drums and fervent shouting. And if a senator's mistress is upset, everyone within a 3-block radius knows it. Sleep in ancient Rome, you realise, is a luxury. Silence is a myth. And safety, that is reserved for the wealthy, the armed, and the extraordinarily lucky. But hey, morning is almost here. You just have to survive one more night, and then you will, of course, repeat the entire cycle. The sun sets on Rome, and with it, you might instinctively expect a moment of calm, a gentle breeze, a quiet meal, perhaps even the deep peace of sleep. Think again. Rome does not go silent at night. It simply shifts into something darker, louder, and undeniably more dangerous. The city never truly sleeps. It prowls. Let's begin with fire again. Roman buildings, especially the tall, timber-framed insulae where the poor live, are veritable tinderboxes, waiting for a careless oil lamp or a forgotten cooking fire to transform them into ash. There is no true, organised fire department, only the vigiles, who are part firefighter, part night watch, and part deeply underpaid janitor. They carry buckets and a lot of hope. If your apartment catches fire, you might be rescued. Or you might become a cautionary tale in tomorrow's street gossip. Then there are the thieves, the cut-purses, and the pickpockets who treat the moonlight like a hunting licence. Rome's alleys are narrow, twisting, and entirely unlit. Torches are expensive. If you must walk after dark, you are doing so by feel, by instinct, and hopefully not by yourself. Do not carry anything shiny. Do not make eye contact. And whatever you do, do not get caught between two drunken gladiators arguing about someone's missing sandal. Speaking of drunk, the city's nightlife is booming. Taverns spill over with cheap diluted wine, raucous music, and men shouting bad poetry about Mars, and women they will never impress. Fights break out with startling frequency. Dice games end in blood. And sometimes an angry noble decides to settle a grudge by having a slave publicly beat someone in the street. You, dear listener, learn to hide in the shadows and pretend you saw nothing. If you are a woman walking alone, good luck. Rome is not kind to unchaperoned females after dark. The streets, you realise, belong to the desperate, the reckless, and the dangerously bored. Trying to sleep isn't much better. Your insula groans and creaks, as if contemplating collapsing around you. Rats scurry through the thin walls. Your neighbour coughs with the distressing sound of a dying goat. Somewhere nearby, someone is screaming, either from passion, from murder, or from both. You press your face into your sweaty, straw-filled pillow and pray to Mercury for silence. But there is no silence in Rome, not for you. Because in the Roman Empire, dear listener, even the darkness is loud. And when dawn finally comes, you will, inevitably, have to do it all again. You have woken up in a crumbling insula. You have survived public toilets, navigated terrifying chariot traffic, witnessed gladiator gore, perhaps absorbed a touch of lead poisoning, endured the doctor's leeches, participated in mandatory religious festivals, feared burning rooftops, and eaten half-cooked lentils soaked in fermented fish sauce. You have bowed to gods you barely understand, obeyed laws that do not truly protect you, and attempted to sleep through riots, the scurrying of rats, and the occasional public decapitation. You are by now dirty, profoundly tired, possibly infected, and almost certainly emotionally scarred by the lingering memory of the communal sponge. And dear listener, it has only been one day. Would you last another? Honestly, no, you would not. Most modern humans, with our comforting air conditioning, our miraculous antibiotics, and our 5-minute delivery windows would likely crumble by lunchtime. You would, perhaps, give up before the second round of Grum. And yet, the Romans did it, for centuries. Because here is the maddening, magnificent thing. In the midst of all this filth, this brutality, and this incessant noise, Rome, somehow, worked. They built immense cities, intricate roads, staggering aqueducts, vast libraries, beautiful temples, and monumental amphitheatres. They expanded their empire across continents, administering complex laws, developing profound philosophy, mapping the stars, performing intricate surgeries and inventing concrete. Concrete, that very material, still holds up better than most modern buildings. They created systems that shaped Europe and far beyond for 2,000 years. Latin became the very root of half the languages you hear today. Their architecture inspired cathedrals, parliaments, and countless college campuses. Their political concepts, republics, senates, veto power, still echo through modern democracies. But it came at a cost. For the average Roman, not the emperors, not the marble-bathed elite. Daily life was a hard-fought, relentless grind. And yet, they endured. They adapted. They didn't, you see, have a choice. Because Rome wasn't built of gold. It was built of sweat, fear, ambition, and sheer, unwavering survival. Layer by layer, person by person, century by bloody century. And that, dear listener, is why it lasted. You would, almost certainly, be begging to go back to modern plumbing and antihistamines by mid-afternoon. You would trade your entire denarii pouch for a hot shower and a chair with a proper back on it. And that's perfectly okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone somewhere once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire. So you could sit here today, clean, safe, and mildly horrified as you gently drift off. Now, as the echoes of Rome begin to recede, let us turn our attention to a different land, a different time, and a different kind of strength. Imagine, if you will, being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BCE. You have royal blood coursing through your veins, a name destined for legend, Rhodogun. And perhaps more importantly, you live in a world where your family spends more time quieting rebellions than hosting lavish dinner parties. Rhodogun, you see, was not born into an era of peace and pearls. She was born into a landscape of grit, of wild horses, and the constant chilling possibility that someone might poison your dates. Her father, Mithridates II, was no idle king. He was the force who expanded Parthia from a dusty peripheral kingdom into a formidable empire, one that would, in time, dare to spar with the mighty Roman Republic. But expansion, as is often the case, brings its own set of problems, namely relentless rebellions, acts of quiet betrayal, and those tenacious neighbours who simply refuse to accept that your burgeoning army now owns their backyard. As a young woman, Rhodogun would have grown up watching envoys argue with heated words, commanders drawing maps in the sand with grim determination, and palace scribes frantically trying to keep track of who was loyal this week. She was not trained merely in the delicate art of silken ceremony. She learned statecraft, the quiet power of command presence, and perhaps how to wear armour that somehow did not clash with her earrings. It is important to grasp the role of Parthian women in this era. While not always bathed in the public spotlight, Parthian noblewomen were no strangers to power. Some discreetly ruled cities, others meticulously plotted dynastic alliances, and a rare few, like Rhodogun, became legends not for who they married, but for who they decisively defeated, and defeat she did. But that part, dear listener, comes later. At this point in her life, Rhodogun's name was already recognised, not just within the palace, but perhaps in the dusty villages and the distant outposts. She was a living symbol, not merely of royal lineage, but of fierce Parthian pride. She carried with her the heavy expectation that she would either marry a king or perhaps become one in spirit. She did not seem content with sitting idly on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces rebelled. While most royal ladies were being gently oiled and delicately perfumed, Rhodogun was likely poring over military reports and untangling complex court logistics. She, it seemed, had no time for vanity, and as fate would have it, she would one day make a vow that involved not washing her hair until a rebellion was utterly crushed. Spoiler alert, dear listener, it took a while. But before we arrive at that dusty, unwashed crown moment, we need to understand precisely what kind of rebellion would dare provoke a princess who would rather lead troops than wear gold. The Parthian Empire, grand as it appeared on any map, was more a patchwork of duct tape than a solid structure of marble. Stretching from the warm Persian Gulf to the very edges of Mesopotamia and beyond, it was stitched together by intricate marriages, solemn oaths, and the occasional sword pressed firmly, uncomfortably against someone's neck. So, when a significant rebellion flared up in the western provinces, most likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't exactly surprising. What was surprising was the sheer audacity of the rebels. These were not just disgruntled tax evaders or local bandits. These were full-blown aristocrats and powerful city leaders, deeply angered at the central authority, and perhaps emboldened by the young age or perceived absence of a strong male royal enforcer. They didn't just throw a tantrum, they seized formidable fortresses, brutally silenced Parthian envoys, and essentially with a collective sneer told the crown to go polish its own sandals. Now, under ordinary circumstances, the king would have swiftly dispatched a trusted general, or perhaps a slightly ambitious cousin with too much bravado and too little brains. But these, dear listener, were not ordinary circumstances, for reasons still quietly debated by historians. Perhaps a matter of timing, perhaps complex logistics, perhaps sheer royal defiance. Rhodogun herself took command, and not just in the abstract, I'll approve the battle plans kind of way. No, she mounted a horse, donned armour, and made a public vow that would, in time, become the stuff of legend. She would not wash, comb, or otherwise tend to her hair until the rebellion was utterly crushed. It was bold. It was dramatic. It was frankly a nightmare for court stylists. But that vow, dramatic as it sounds, was not an act of vanity. It was a potent declaration, a visual symbol that irrevocably tied her personal dignity to the very fate of the empire. Every time someone saw her tangled, dust-laden hair, they would be quietly reminded, this isn't over until we win. And that, it seemed, worked. Soldiers rallied. The troops did not just see a princess, they saw a commander who was literally allowing her beauty to decay with the ongoing war. She embodied Parthian resilience, the kind that didn't rely on gilded thrones but on thorns, on dust, and on sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels, far away, probably didn't know whether to laugh or to panic. They had expected a general, perhaps a smooth diplomat. Instead, they got a furious, unwashed woman who was riding straight for their gates, with steel in her eyes and no time for conditioner. And worse, she meant business. When Rhodogun set out from the capital, she was not escorted by a lavish court parade, or showered in delicate rose petals. She was accompanied by disciplined cavalry, raw grit, and the immense weight of an empire that needed its rebels squashed like an overripe fig, and she certainly looked the part. Gone were any signs of courtly delicacy. Her hair, already famously unkempt, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a grim banner of war-torn determination. In a world obsessed with appearances, she, with a quiet strength, turned her very own into a formidable weapon. The campaign was not swift. This was no single siege, easily resolved with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified and crucially confident. They had expected hesitation from the central power, not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with an unyielding fire in her gaze. But Rhodogun did not waver. Her military instincts, it turned out, were remarkably sharp, perhaps even sharper than many of the men who had led before her. She employed classic Parthian strategies, lightning mobility, feigned retreats, and swift hit-and-run raids. Her forces would appear suddenly at the edge of a rebel-held city, vanish like smoke, and then return a day later from an entirely unexpected flank. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her, not just as a symbol, but as a brilliant tactician. She did not ride safely behind the lines. She was up front, dirt beneath her fingernails and a quiet fury beneath her helmet. And as the weeks dragged on, so too did her hair. It is said that by the third month the strands had begun to knot into dense ropes, heavy with dust and sweat and the quiet whispers of battlefield prayers. But that, strangely, only made her more terrifying to her enemies and more profoundly revered by her men. Rebels, in their fear, called her the Witch Queen, not because she practiced magic, but because no noblewoman, they reasoned, should still be fighting in the field and so adamantly refusing a bath. Surely something unnatural was at work. But there was nothing magical about it, dear listener, just sheer, unrelenting discipline. By the time her army laid siege to the final rebel holdout, her legend had grown faster than the rebellion itself. In taverns and tents alike, soldiers quietly joked that the enemy wasn't truly afraid of Parthian swords. They were afraid Rhodogun would quite literally never wash again. And truth be told, they weren't entirely wrong. The last stronghold of the rebellion loomed ahead, a walled city rumoured to be impenetrable, where the rebel leaders had dug in like stubborn ticks on a dog. Supplies had been hoarded, archers lined the parapets, and the gates had been reinforced with the kind of smug confidence only traitors possess. They believed, with a quiet certainty, that they could outlast Rodogun. A very big mistake. By now, her appearance was legendary. Word had spread not just through the Empire, but deep into enemy territory. "The woman who won't wash," they whispered, "has arrived." Some said her hair had turned to iron. Others claimed she hadn't slept in weeks. The myths piled up like siege ladders. But Rodogun was no myth. She was real, and she had tactics. Instead of launching a reckless, bloody assault, she opted for a slow, agonizing siege. Cut off their trade routes, intercept their messengers, poison their wells. The rebels had braced for a battle of swords. Instead, they got starvation. She weaponized time itself, allowing her enemies to rot from the inside out. And all the while, she camped patiently outside the city with her soldiers, just another commander beneath the canvas tents. She shared their simple meals, gritty bread and lukewarm wine. She inspected their armour, she led patrols, and she still, despite every opportunity, refused to so much as touch a comb. For her soldiers, this quiet, determined vow had become sacred. No one dared suggest she break it, not even in jest. It had become a living embodiment of Parthian pride, a visible symbol that their suffering was not for nothing. Every tangled strand was a poignant reminder. We are still in this fight. Inside the rebel city, morale quietly crumbled. They had expected to demoralize the enemy by holding out. Instead, it was they who began to wither. Their own commanders began to argue amongst themselves. Food supplies ran dangerously low. Whispers of desertion began to ripple through the ranks like cracks through stone. And then came the breaking point. A small gate, left unguarded for just an hour, perhaps out of fatigue, perhaps due to a desperate act of sabotage, was found by one of Rodogun's diligent scouts. That night, under the deep cover of darkness and a rising wind, her forces slipped in and, with quiet precision, opened the main gates from within. By morning, the city was hers, and Rodogun, her face streaked with sweat and ash, stood atop the battlements, unbathed, victorious, and utterly, chillingly terrifying. Victory was not declared with the triumphant blast of trumpets or a grand public parade. It was declared, rather, with water. After months of dust, of battle, and of relentless pursuit, Rodogun stood before her army, not in royal robes, but in the same battlefield garb she had worn since the campaign began. Her armour bore the quiet dents from rebel blades. Her face was lined from sun and strain, and her hair, her wild, matted, filthy hair, now hung down her back like a lion's mane made of wire and quiet legend. But she had done it. Every rebel city had fallen, every oath-breaker had been brought low. And now, with her vow finally complete, she could at last do what no one in the Empire had dared to attempt for months. She could wash her hair. According to tradition, and later accounts passed down through the gentle currents of oral history, Rodogun summoned her servants not to a private gilded chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, the very men who had bled beside her, to witness this profound moment. Basins were filled with fresh water, fragrant oils were gently warmed, and combs were retrieved from storage like sacred relics. And then, beneath the open sky, the warrior princess of Parthia, caked in the deep grime of war, began to scrub away months of rebellion. It was symbolic. Every tangle undone was another city reclaimed. Every rinse of water over her scalp washed away defiance, soaking into the earth as if the very land itself had been restored to order. Some say she wept, others say she laughed, a quiet, guttural sound of release. But what no one disputed was the profound silence among the troops as they watched. Hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood like statues as Rodogun emerged from her ritual, transformed. No crown was placed on her head. She didn't need one. The dust had become her diadem. The very act of not washing had become more powerful than any jewel. And in that moment, Parthia didn't just have a princess, it had a symbol. She could have returned to court in triumph, allowed the scribes to compose endless, flattering odes, and allowed the nobles to fall over themselves in praise. But she did not rush back to luxury. She stayed with her troops a while longer. She quietly dined with them. She listened to them. She knew that her legend had just begun, but she didn't want it forged in gold. She wanted it forged indelibly, in memory. After the hair washing that became an event for the ages, Rhodagun could have ridden straight to the capital with fanfare, with banners unfurling, and with enough propaganda to last a century. But she didn't. Instead, she chose the long route back, deliberately visiting the cities she had so recently reclaimed one by one. She walked their dusty streets, inspected their defences with a keen eye, and ensured no embers of rebellion still glowed dangerously beneath the ashes. This wasn't a mere ceremony. It was a quiet, effective strategy. Rhodagun understood the subtle danger of victory, how quickly it can melt into complacency. Empires, she knew, don't fall from defeat alone. They fall from forgetting why they fought in the first place. She wanted the rebels and loyalists alike to understand that Parthian strength wasn't just cavalry and coin. It was embodied in her very presence. A woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by quiet example, not by royal decree. And loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered, not to gawk at royalty, but to stare in quiet awe at her. Not polished, not perfumed, but real. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. She quietly asked for reports, heard complaints with a steady gaze, and paid for supplies out of her own war coffers. She rewarded cities that had stayed loyal and offered clemency carefully, cautiously, to those who repented. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a living legend. Scribes rushed to record her tale. Artists argued over how best to capture her, wild-haired and battle-worn or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about the profound implications. A woman commanding armies, keeping sacred oaths, and now standing at the very heart of Parthian power with the fierce loyalty of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the quiet dilemma. What do you do with a princess who is more popular than most kings? Some discreetly urged that she be married off, as if that would somehow contain her immense influence. Others wanted her placed in permanent charge of border defences. But Rhodagun didn't seem concerned with titles or political manoeuvring. She had proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne. The dust, her crown, and her name, already etched indelibly in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike, needed no royal inscription to endure. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, dear listener, not with gold, but with history. In the months following her monumental campaign, Rhodagun did not seek the limelight, but it followed her anyway. She became the quiet subject of poetry, of sculpture, of palace gossip, and of profound awe. Not because she demanded it, but because she had, with quiet determination, earned it. Every soldier who had fought under her command returned home with a tale, and every tale made her larger, more enduring, more untouchable. Yet, in the palace halls of Parthia, where politics slithered like snakes behind silk curtains, her silence was unnerving. She didn't boast, she didn't lobby, she didn't ask for titles or lands. Instead, she observed, she listened, and she understood that the real battlefield had simply shifted from stone walls to whispered conversations. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on the exact moment in the tangled Parthian dynastic timeline, had to tread carefully around her. Rhodagun wasn't just popular. She was respected in a way few men at court could ever hope to compete with. Not adored for her beauty or her bloodline, but for her quiet leadership, for her unwavering command. She had, with quiet resolve, turned her vow into policy, her filth into folklore, and yet the silence she kept was as deliberate as any military manoeuvre. She didn't tell others what she planned next, because perhaps even she didn't know. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting. She wasn't commanding troops or outwitting rebels. She was still. And that stillness, you realise, unnerved many. What, they wondered, does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One quiet theory among historians is that Rhodagun used this very silence as leverage. Her presence alone, her every quiet nod or discerning glance subtly forced decisions. Officials hesitated to propose bad policy for fear she might simply frown. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping she might weigh in. Her silence wasn't passive, it was a finely honed tool. She had discovered that not speaking could be more powerful, more influential than speaking aloud. And so she remained, a living legend, quietly walking the palace corridors. Her freshly washed hair, now braided not just with gold thread but with indelible memory. Her very existence challenged the established norms. She had proven that Parthian might wasn't confined to masculine hands. It could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities quietly at its feet, and all she had to do now was wait. Because sometimes the greatest move is no move at all. As the years gently passed, Rodegun's name slowly began to fade from the formal records. Parthian scribes, often more eager to elevate kings and dynasties than unruly warrior princesses, began to subtly downplay her campaign. The silence she once used as a weapon now became the convenient excuse for her erasure. No grand mausoleum was raised in her name. No epic poem commissioned by the state bore her face on golden scrolls. But that's the remarkable thing about true legend, dear listener. It doesn't need permission to survive. In the dusty outpost where her army had once marched, in the humble villages she had spared, her name remained a whispered spell, a quiet strength. Mothers told stories of her to their daughters, not as a fanciful fairy tale, but as a quiet warning to any man who dared to underestimate a woman with a mission. Soldiers recited her tactics as if they were sacred texts, and rebels, even decades later, still spoke of her as if she might ride again from the dust, her hair flying like war banners. There's something profoundly unsettling about someone who so utterly breaks every rule of their time and still, miraculously, wins. Rodegun wasn't content to be a mere decoration in a court. She didn't play the flute, nor paint birds, nor practice the refined art of being quietly ignored. She burned through her time like a comet, and then vanished just as quickly. Historians have quietly debated what became of her. Some believe she retired from public life, choosing the quietude of peace over the complexities of politics. Others think she remained a silent advisor in the shadows, subtly shaping Parthian strategy from behind the veil of anonymity. A few romantics claim she rode out one final time to settle a border dispute and disappeared into legend, never confirmed, never denied. But what is certain is this: her legacy endured where it mattered most, in the hearts of the people. She may not have worn the physical crown, but she ruled in ways no diadem ever could. She redefined what loyalty truly meant. She showed that a vow, even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair, could be as binding as a royal decree, and far, far more inspiring. And though history books may offer her only a fleeting footnote, the very dust of Parthia still remembers her. Because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal, dear listener. You just need to keep your vow and win. Centuries after her quiet departure, Rodegun's story remains a paradox, well known in whispers, yet curiously elusive in ink. No towering statue bears her likeness. No grand royal tomb sings her praises in carved stone. But in the collective memory of those who admire quiet rebellion, unyielding endurance, and principled ferocity, she is immortal. Not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way forces of nature often are. She didn't need to conquer foreign lands or sign monumental treaties. What she conquered, with quiet determination, was expectation itself. In a world where women were for the most part told to wait behind curtains while men spilled blood in their name, Rodegun, with a fierce resolve, tore the curtain down and marched out, perhaps barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command, she took it. And the empire, rather than collapsing, quietly followed. More importantly, she taught her people a profound lesson that no decree could ever enforce. That loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from seeing your leader suffer beside you, from watching them choose difficult discipline over quiet comfort, from watching them keep a vow longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect. No legend is. But her story endures precisely because it wasn't polished or clean. It was tangled. It was muddy. It was utterly honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that quiet filth was dignity. In that unwavering vow was a vision of leadership stronger than any mere title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the fight more than her own vanity. And that's the part history couldn't quite erase. Even now, long after Parthia has crumbled and its cities have turned to sand, her name quietly returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her. Writers search for her subtle footprints, a vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who have had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect, quiet sense. Rodegun was never about glamour, she was about grit. And in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, dear listener, not gold. Dust. The very same substance that emperors try to escape in death. yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honour. She was forgotten by kings, ignored by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that, you realise, is where legends truly live. Not in stone, but in the enduring soil. Before empires clashed and blood quietly soaked the sand. Before kings trembled at her very name, Tomyris was simply a daughter of the wind, born to the raw, open steppe. The land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with profound philosophy. It was brutal, wild, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the massage tay. Fierce, nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains, their lives shaped by the stark realities of survival, the rigid codes of honour and the constant threat of war. We know little of Tomyris's childhood, but we can quietly imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run, to shoot a bow before she could speak in full sentences. Among the massage day, girls were not caged in tents or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with the quiet strength of iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed. And Tomyris, even as a young woman, bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and the vast sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride, and when enemies approached they met them not with prayers, but with a storm of arrows. Tomyris likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what is certain is that when the moment came, she didn't simply inherit leadership, she seized it. In a time when most women were considered property, Tomyris commanded an army. She negotiated with kings, she dared to speak as an equal, and if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen, she was a shahut, the steppe's checkmate, a war chief in bronze and leather who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, never comes without consequence. As Tomyris began to solidify her rule, whispers grew louder. Across the mountains to the south, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set. The steppe wind howled, and Tomyris, daughter of warriors, would soon ride into legend. While Tomyris quietly reigned over the open steppes, far to the south, a different kind of power was steadily rising, structured, imperial, and relentlessly expansionist. Cyrus the Great, the formidable founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners now flew over vast deserts, towering mountains and ancient cities where languages shifted with every few days' ride. But Cyrus, you see, was not yet finished. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually eyes the distant horizon. To Cyrus, the Massagetae were a threat wrapped in opportunity. They weren't rich in gold or grand cities, but they controlled the crucial northeastern frontier, and that meant potential access to key lands, vital resources, and lucrative trade routes. More importantly, the Massagetae had something no empire, especially Cyrus's, could afford to ignore: pride. And pride, in Cyrus's calculating eyes, could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew that brute force wasn't always the best first move. He had a reputation for cleverness, for subtle diplomacy, and for strategic trickery. So he tried a different approach, one that kings before him had used to quietly dissolve threats without a single drop of blood. He proposed marriage. According to ancient sources, notably Herodotus, Cyrus sent envoys to Tomyris, offering an alliance through matrimony. On paper, it sounded like a grand royal match, the great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the Massagetae. But Tomyris was not naive. She saw the proposal for precisely what it was: not an offer of love or genuine partnership, but a calculated attempt to absorb her people without a fight, to swallow their sovereignty. She declined, and that rejection did not sit well in the opulent halls of Pasargadae. With the diplomatic games over, Cyrus shifted to his favoured language: war. He ordered his vast army to cross the Araxes River, the formidable natural barrier that separated Persia from the untamed land of the Massagetae. He was going to take what Tomyris had so adamantly refused to give. But Tomyris was already preparing. She knew the terrain, every rise and dip of the boundless steppe. She knew how her people fought, on horseback, fast and furious, And most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming to crush a woman who dared to say no. The world's most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of quiet, unyielding fury he had just awakened on the steppe. Cyrus the Great, master strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed, with quiet confidence, that he could outwit Tomyris. He had faced mighty kings, crushed fortified cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massagetæ were little more than wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to defend. He didn't realise he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and infinitely more furious. Tomyris had warned him. After rejecting his marriage offer, she sent a clear, chilling message. Cross the Araxes River and you will regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his vast army into the Massagetæ land. Instead of striking immediately, Tomyris pulled her forces back, quietly luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar, treacherous terrain. The Persians eventually found an abandoned camp, well stocked with food and, more importantly, wine, a luxury the nomadic Massagetæ rarely indulged in. It was a baited trap, and Cyrus, perhaps thinking the enemy had panicked and fled, took it. Inside the camp he left a portion of his army under the command of General Harpagus, a trusted officer. As the Massagetæ returned under the deep cover of night, they fell upon the drunk and unsuspecting Persians with deadly precision. The battle was brutal and swift. Among the dead was Spargapises, Tomyris' son and a Massagetæ commander. Accounts differ on what happened next. Some say Spargapises was taken alive and, realizing his capture, begged for death and took his own life. Others claim he was killed in the chaotic fighting, but all agree. When news reached Tomyris, something inside her shattered, and then, slowly, turned to steel. Her grief was volcanic, but her rage, that, dear listener, became legendary. She sent another message to Cyrus. This one was no warning. It was a cold, unwavering vow. "You may be a glutton for blood," she declared, "but I swear I will give you your fill." She promised to make the ground run red with Persian blood, and her vengeance, she made clear, would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son. He had violated her land. Now he would meet not the queen of the Massagetæ, but the mother of a slain warrior, and the last face he would ever see. The next battle would not be a skirmish. It would be, she vowed, an execution. The sun rose over the vast plains like a freshly honed blade, sharp and blinding. Tomyris stood at the head of her army, no longer just a queen, but a storm-given, terrifying form. Her warriors, hardened by the unrelenting nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and an unyielding rage. This, you realize, was no longer about politics. This was about blood. Cyrus, for all his might, had fatally underestimated the Massagetæ. He assumed they would fight like the tribes he had conquered before, chaotic, uncoordinated, easy to crush. But Tomyris had spent her entire life among warriors. She understood how to strike, not blindly, but with cold, precise calculation. She rallied her forces for a full-scale assault on the Persian invaders, and this time she was holding nothing back. The exact location of this final, devastating battle is lost to history, swallowed by the immense vastness of the steppe. But what is clear is that Tomyris launched a ferocious counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a tide of glinting knives. They fired arrows from horseback with astonishing accuracy, then closed in with axes, fighting like people who had nothing left to lose. The Persians, battle-hardened, disciplined and experienced, were not expecting this level of organised fury. Tomyris didn't just lead her troops, she fought beside them. Her very presence on the battlefield ignited her warriors like wildfire. Every strike was driven by searing vengeance. Every charge was a direct answer to her son's death. Cyrus tried to hold the line, but it shattered. The Persians were routed. Many died where they stood. Others fled into the endless grasslands, only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the known world, fell in the chaos. Whether he was slain in combat or captured and executed depends on the version told, but either way, he died on Tomyris' terms. What came next is infamous. According to Herodotus, Tomyris found Cyrus's body on the battlefield, ordered his head severed, and then, in a final act of stark symbolic revenge, submerged it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she is said to have declared, "of the blood you thirsted for." Was it a historical fact or a poetic embellishment? Perhaps both. But it didn't matter. The message was eternal. Tomyris was not to be conquered. When the dust settled and the grass drank deep the blood of empire, Tomyris stood victorious. A warrior queen who had done what no king or army before her could. She brought Cyrus the Great to his final, brutal end. News of the defeat sent shockwaves across the ancient world. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, thought to be unstoppable, had been profoundly humiliated by a woman from the steppes. The Persians did their best to downplay the loss, but the death of their founder could not be ignored. Cyrus's body was eventually returned and buried with honour in the royal tomb at Pasargadae. Yet the stain of his final defeat would linger like a quiet wound on the empire's legacy. For Tomyris and the Massagetæ, however, the victory was more than mere revenge. It was a profound declaration. They had defended their sovereignty not just with weapons, but with quiet dignity. Tomyris had stood up to the world's most powerful ruler, and she hadn't just survived. She had triumphed. And then she quietly vanished from history. No records survived detailing her later years, her death, or any further successes she may have achieved. It is as if, after taking her vengeance, Tomyris simply rode back into the horizon and allowed the wind to carry her legend forward. In the centuries that followed, historians, poets, and chroniclers would try to fill in the blanks, turning her into a powerful symbol as much as a woman. To the Persians, her name was a bitter, quiet reminder. To the Greeks, she was a fascinating paradox, a barbarian who displayed more nobility than many kings. And to the people of Central Asia, Tomyris became folklore, a ghostly queen who rides through the steppe, fierce and unbending with a sword that remembers. Her legacy would inspire countless depictions across cultures. Medieval manuscripts portrayed her in regal armour. Renaissance paintings imagined her towering over Cyrus's corpse. In every age, she became what people needed, a mother avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in hubris, or a profound symbol of feminine power. But one truth cuts through the myth. She quietly changed history. Tomyris didn't inherit a throne. She forged it in fire and fury, and for one brief, unforgettable moment, the steppe queen proved that not all empires rise. Some fall to the swift hooves of warriors who ride with an unyielding vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Tomyris comes not from local Massagetæ records. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the diligent pen of a Greek named Herodotus, often called the father of history. Writing a century after her time, he immortalized Tomyris in his histories, casting her as a warrior queen of astonishing resolve and terrifying vengeance. But Herodotus wasn't simply reporting facts. He was, in his own way, weaving a story, one part chronicle, one part morality tale. To him and his Greek audience, Tomyris represented the ultimate reversal of imperial arrogance. Cyrus the Great, a man who had conquered half the known world, fell not to a vast army or a rival king, but to a woman who fought not for glory, but for her child. Her victory was almost mythic, and Herodotus treated it as such. He even detailed her grisly revenge, the wineskin of blood, the severed head of Cyrus, and her damning words, "Drink your fill." But was it true? Modern historians debate this endlessly. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated or even invented parts of the tale, using Tomyris as a narrative tool to humble the Persian Empire, which, at the time of his writing, was still a looming powerful force over the Greek world. Others believe that while the blood wineskin episode might be symbolic, the core event, Cyrus's death at the hands of Tomyris, likely did happen. There's also the question of bias. Herodotus, for all his insight, often filtered foreign cultures through a distinctly Greek lens. He portrayed the Massagetæ as wild and free, yet noble, an exotic mirror to Greek ideals of honour and liberty. Tomyris, in that frame, wasn't just a barbarian. She was a moral counterweight to Persian ambition. Still, even if details blurred over time, Herodotus succeeded in one crucial thing. He ensured Tomyris would not be forgotten. Because of him, she became more than a historical footnote. She entered the realm of legend, where facts soften but impact sharpens. And in that quiet space between myth and memory, Tomyris's story found a strange kind of immortality. In a world dominated by kings and conquerors, Herodotus left us a queen who refused to kneel and left her enemies bleeding in the sand. Though she may have slain one of the ancient world's most iconic emperors, Tamiris never ruled an empire herself. She didn't build cities of stone or inscribe edicts on golden tablets. Her people, the Massagetæ, were nomads, living not by walls, but by the subtle rhythms of the land, the vast sky, and the swift horse. This meant that Tamiris's legacy was never institutionalized. There were no marble busts or royal coins bearing her likeness, no formal archives to immortalize her decrees. Instead, her story passed on, as stories do on the steppe, through firelight, through song, and through the whispered awe of warriors. The Massagetæ were one of many powerful tribes of the Central Asian steppes. Their cousins included the Scythians, the Saka, and the Dahai, all expert horse archers who roamed the boundless lands between the Caspian Sea and the distant borders of ancient China. These tribes were feared by empires for their incredible mobility, their unpredictable tactics, and their unyielding ferocity in battle. Tamiris, as a female leader among them, was rare, but not entirely unique. Steppe culture, unlike many sedentary civilizations, often allowed women far greater freedoms and responsibilities. Women rode, hunted, fought, and even led. Among the Scythians, graves of female warriors, buried with weapons, armour and horse gear, have been found by archaeologists, quietly confirming that the stories of fierce steppe queens were more than just legend. Tamiris stood at the pinnacle of that tradition. Her power didn't come from inheritance or religion. It came from quiet respect, raw grit, and sheer, undeniable capability. She was a unifying force among scattered clans, a potent political leader, and a formidable military commander in a landscape where survival meant riding faster, shooting better, and fearing nothing. But because the Massagetæ left no enduring monuments, Tamiris became a kind of phantom queen, her name echoing only in the writings of outsiders and in the vibrant oral traditions of the steppe. To the Persian scribes she was a grim warning, to the Greeks a marvel, and to her people likely a memory carried in bloodlines and battle songs, a ghost who rode with them across the vast plains. Empires may rise and fall in stone, dear listener, but the stories of the steppe live on forever in the wind. And Tamiris, fierce, grieving and unbroken, became its voice. Centuries passed, and the empires that once surrounded the Massagetæ rose and crumbled. Cyrus's successors built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and eventually faded into the dusty footnotes of time. But Tamiris's legend endured, not in the palaces of kings, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a profound symbol of female strength, of fierce resistance, of the untamed spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tamiris embodied a kind of defiance that transcended geography. She was not Roman, not Greek, not Persian, and so her story belonged to no single empire. That, you realise, made her both dangerous and profoundly inspiring. In the medieval Islamic world, chroniclers occasionally mentioned her name, reshaped by language, but never quite forgotten. In some versions, she was praised for her justice and her relentless vengeance. In others, she was seen as a savage queen, a stark reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both glorious and terrifying. By the time the Renaissance quietly rolled around, European artists rediscovered her tale through the writings of Herodotus. Painters depicted her in elaborate armour, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic painting, she holds his severed head aloft like a trophy, blood-soaked and victorious. It was theatrical, yes, but also quietly political. These artists were fascinated by the audacious idea of a woman who didn't just survive in a man's world, she decisively won. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tamiris became a potent nationalist icon in regions like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. Poets and educators reclaimed her as a historical heroine, quiet proof that the roots of Central Asian identity were fierce, proud and deeply feminine. Her name appeared in textbooks, her likeness in statues and even in military ceremonies. A woman who had once ruled on horseback with a bow in hand was now riding once more through memory and myth, through rebellion and pride. In a world that still quietly wrestles with the idea of powerful women, Tamiris remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect, saintly, or tame, She was decisive, brutal when necessary, compassionate only to those who deserved it. She was resistance in human form, and the blood of empire on her hands was a crown she wore without apology. History tends to favour the builders of monuments, the meticulous writers of laws, the kings who carved their names into enduring stone. Tomyris did none of these things. She left no empire behind, no palace to excavate, no royal seal to decipher, and yet her name still lives. Not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a quiet contradiction to how history often remembers women, not as helpmates or footnotes, but as undeniable forces of destiny. Tomyris didn't beg for recognition. She took it, with blood and fire. She didn't ride behind a king. She rode against one, and she won. Her story is retold in classrooms from Central Asia to Europe, not simply because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him. She wasn't defending an empire, she was defending freedom. A freedom that rode on the strong backs of horses, that hunted with fierce hawks, that slept under the vast silent stars, a freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map. Today, her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face adorns coins and textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she is a mother of nations, a vital link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past, a constant reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the thundering gallop of horses. In a world still divided by power, by gender, by memory, Tomyris is a beacon. Not just because she killed a great king, but because she taught us something even greater, that dignity is not given, it is seized. That sometimes true leadership looks like a mother grieving her son and refusing to let the killer walk away unpunished. We often wonder why some names survive while others simply vanish. Tomyris survived because she was unforgettable. Because in a time when women were often expected to disappear into the quiet tents of men, she rose, blade in hand, fury in heart, and carved her story indelibly into the very flesh of history. Empires fall, statues crumble, but legends, dear listener, ride. And somewhere in the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. Now, as the echoes of battles fade into the quiet hum of the night, let us turn our minds to a creature often overlooked, yet profoundly vital to ancient civilizations, the bee. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't merely a hobby or a simple agricultural pursuit. It was a state-sponsored science, imbued with deep divine approval. Long before modern apiaries and their intricate structures, Egyptians had already developed an organized, remarkably mobile system for managing bees and extracting their precious honey. By 2400 BCE, the practice of beekeeping was depicted in intricate detail on the walls of tombs in the sun-drenched necropolises of Saqqara. It wasn't just about harvesting honey, it was a sacred practice, deeply embedded in their agriculture, their medicine, their religion, and even their elaborate rituals surrounding the afterlife. The Egyptians utilized horizontal clay tube hives, typically stacked in long rows and laid on their sides. These were nothing like the familiar modern wooden boxes. They looked more like terracotta drain pipes, yet they were carefully designed to be relocated seasonally. As the mighty Nile's floodwaters receded and the fertile flowers bloomed along its banks, these hives would be gently moved up and down the river, following the nectar flow. This transhumance method was incredibly advanced for its time, almost like an ancient GPS for bees. Beekeepers would use clay or stone pipes to blow smoke into the hives, a calming agent for the bees before the delicate process of honey extraction. Without protective suits, these keepers had to rely on careful timing, years of experience, and a fair bit of quiet courage. Honeycombs were removed gently, and the honey collected not just for sustenance, but for medicine, for the complex process of mummification, and for sacred rites. Honey in Egypt was considered a profound gift from the gods, a divine substance intimately associated with Ra, the sun god. According to Egyptian myth, bees themselves were born from the tears of Ra as they fell to earth. This wasn't poetic fluff. It profoundly shaped how the Egyptians revered and treated bees, seeing them as tiny, buzzing messengers between the mortal world and the divine. Honey was used in temple offerings, in funerary rituals to nourish the deceased, and even as a valuable currency in trade. It also played a prominent role in medicine. Ancient papyri list honey as a key ingredient in over 500 remedies, mixed with herbs, wine, or milk, to treat wounds, infections, and various gastrointestinal issues. Its antibacterial properties were instinctively known, even if the underlying science wasn't. Beeswax, too, was diligently harvested and used in cosmetics, in embalming, and even in the creation of writing tablets. It held value far beyond the hive, becoming an integral part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers alike. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a source of sweetness, it was a subtle, yet powerful symbol of balance, of healing, and of celestial order, carefully cultivated under the watchful eyes of both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and a quiet sanctity, ancient Mesopotamia gave it something equally vital: laws. The cradle of civilization, often credited with mastering irrigation, writing, and city building, also understood the profound value of honey and the quiet importance of protecting its production. Though Mesopotamian beekeeping wasn't as visually celebrated as in Egyptian tombs, its subtle traces are found in cuneiform tablets and legal codes, quietly suggesting a sophisticated yet unshowy practice. References to bees and honey appear as early as the Sumerian period. In Akkadian and Babylonian texts there are mentions of ninmis, meaning bee gardens, or apiaries. These spaces were often attached to temple grounds or royal estates, hinting that honey production was an elite controlled resource. Honey and beeswax were used in religious offerings, in medicine, as food, and in trade. And losing a hive could be a serious economic blow. The most telling piece of evidence comes from the Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1754 BCE. While most of the code is famously devoted to issues like theft, injury, and agriculture, a few quiet lines directly address bee disputes. If someone allowed their bees to swarm into another man's field and the bees caused damage, they were liable. If honey was stolen, restitution had to be made, sometimes in the form of silver or replacement jars. In a world where almost everything was meticulously counted in grain, the very fact that honey warranted its own specific legal protection speaks volumes. Mesopotamians also understood bees as more than just insects. Some texts describe them as divine messengers, even linking them to Ninurta, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax in particular was valued for sealing documents and creating ritual figurines. It was both practical and mystical, a quiet part of both rigid bureaucracy and subtle magic. Though the exact design of Mesopotamian hives isn't fully preserved, scholars believe they may have used mud brick or woven basket hives, similar to early Levantine styles. These would have been kept in shaded gardens or on rooftops, carefully protected from the harsh summer heat. Mesopotamian beekeeping was less about worship and more about structure, about regulating resources, ensuring quiet fairness, and maintaining the delicate economic balance of a society where even a bee sting might end in litigation. Here, the hive was not just a biological wonder, it was a subtle microcosm of order, of law, and of the civilizing impulse itself. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, long before the Greeks took centre stage, the Hittites were quietly mastering the art of beekeeping. And they weren't treating it like a mere backyard hobby. To the Hittites, bees were sacred agents of purity, tiny messengers between realms, and utterly essential to both agriculture and the spiritual health of the kingdom. Unlike Egypt and Mesopotamia, where beekeeping was a blend of meticulous science and practical economics, the Hittites took a more ritualistic, deeply reverent approach. In religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, bees are mentioned not just as producers of honey, but as active, vital participants in purification rites. One famous Hittite ritual text quietly describes a ceremony in which a bee is summoned to go and remove the evil, the impurity, and the wrath of the gods. The bee is then released, not killed, a rare show of mercy in ancient rites, suggesting a deep, almost profound reverence for the insect. The Hittites valued honey not only for its taste, but for its sacred utility. It was used in libations, in sacrificial offerings, and in anointing rituals, often combined with wine, milk, or grain. Honey wasn't just consumed, it was poured, it was burned, it was blessed. It served as a vital medium between human intention and divine reception. In terms of practical methods, evidence subtly suggests the Hittites used clay or woven hives, likely stored in protected enclosures near temples, or royal estates. Though the archaeological record is sparse, parallels with neighbouring Levantine and Syrian traditions hint at portable, tube-like hives, possibly made from straw and mud, stacked and managed much like those in Egypt. Beekeepers in the Hittite world likely operated under temple control, their work deeply embedded in seasonal festivals and state rituals. Honey was not a mere commodity. It was a quiet tool of diplomacy, of healing, and of spiritual cleansing. The bee, small and unassuming, held a symbolic weight that far exceeded its tiny size. The Hittites also contributed a vital piece to the global understanding of bees. They recognized bee migration. Some surviving texts describe the seasonal behaviors of swarms, quietly linking blooming patterns with honey flow, an insight that shows how closely they observed their natural environment. In Anatolia, the hum of the hive wasn't background noise. It was a sacred frequency, vibrating, you might imagine, through the very bones of gods and kings alike. The ancient Greeks didn't just study bees. They admired them, they cautiously feared them, and they subtly modelled aspects of their society on their mysterious, intricate order. To the Greeks, the hive was more than a place of honey. It was a living metaphor, a quiet model for the ideal city-state, a profound symbol of divine order and a source of endless scientific curiosity. Greek beekeepers significantly advanced the science of apiculture with a blend of practical knowledge and a certain philosophical flair. Unlike earlier civilizations that used stationary clay hives, the Greeks developed movable terracotta hives with removable lids and sections. These allowed easier access to the honeycomb without utterly destroying the colony, an early, crucial step towards sustainable harvesting. They also mastered the gentle art of smoke control. Using ceramic bellows and carefully crafted clay smokers, they would puff soft smoke into the hive's entrance, sedating the bees before honey extraction. This innovation not only reduced painful stings, but also preserved the hive's structure, allowing for multiple harvests per season. One of the most influential minds in Greek history, Aristotle, studied bees in extraordinary detail. In his Historia Animalium, he meticulously described hive behaviour, noting that bees appeared to have distinct roles. Some gathered nectar, others diligently defended the hive, and one, whom he mistakenly called the king bee, seemed to lead. Although he got the gender wrong, Aristotle's keen observations quietly laid the groundwork for centuries of bee research. Honey held a deeply revered place in Greek culture. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and flavoured cakes. It was also used as a base for medicinal salves, especially in wound care, and was widely seen as a divine gift. The Greeks believed that ambrosia, the very food of the gods, was a sublime mixture of honey and wine. The bee itself held profound mythological significance. It was associated with Artemis, goddess of wild things, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissa, the Greek word for bees. The idea of the bee as a sacred feminine force carried deep symbolic power. For the Greeks, the hive was both a scientific marvel and a spiritual emblem, a quiet reminder that even the smallest creatures move with purpose, with discipline, and with an undeniable grace. In studying bees, they believed they were studying the very laws of nature, and perhaps of the gods themselves. If the Greeks studied bees with wonder, the Romans managed them with ambition. Beekeeping in the Roman Empire wasn't just a quaint cottage industry. It was scaled to match the immense needs of a civilization that stretched across continents. From the sun-drenched vineyards of Gaul to the rolling hills of Hispania, Rome quietly turned the humble hive into an empire-wide enterprise. The Romans inherited much of their apicultural knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, but they expanded it into a formalized agricultural science. Writers like Varro and Columella meticulously recorded detailed instructions for building hives, harvesting honey, and relocating colonies. Their treatises describe beekeeping with a startling modernity, including keen observations on swarm behaviour, seasonal cycles, and pest control. Roman hives came in many forms: hollow logs, ingenious cork-bark containers, traditional clay tubes, and even woven baskets sealed with dung or mud. Flexibility was key. In colder climates, more insulation was needed. In warmer provinces, ventilation was critical. These innovations allowed Rome's beekeepers to adapt their craft across vastly different regions of the sprawling empire. To gently calm bees, Romans employed clay pots filled with smouldering herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke subtly soothed the hive and, perhaps, added a delicate, subtle flavour to the honey. Harvesting was done with iron knives, and wax was separated by melting and straining, later used in candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, and even for waterproofing ships. Honey wasn't just food, it was quite literally everywhere. It was added to wine to make mulsum, used extensively in baking, in sauces for meat and fish, and even as an early energy source for athletes and soldiers. Roman physicians, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and various digestive problems. Its antibacterial properties were well known and widely utilised, but perhaps the most Roman thing about their beekeeping was its sheer organisation. Large villas often boasted dedicated honey farms, meticulously run by enslaved labour under the supervision of estate managers. Production was carefully recorded in ledgers, and surplus honey was sold in bustling markets or exported to distant provinces. Bees were viewed not just as insects, but as productive citizens of the Roman economy. To the Romans, a well-run hive quietly mirrored a well-run household, ordered, obedient, and endlessly fruitful. While ancient civilizations cultivated bees for honey and wax, many also saw the quiet hum of the hive as a doorway to the divine. Across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees weren't merely insects. They were regarded as spiritual beings, silently buzzing between worlds, delivering subtle messages from gods, and offering sacred gifts like honey that gently bridged the natural and supernatural realms. In Egypt, bees were directly tied to divine creation. As mentioned earlier, mythology claimed that Ra, the sun god, shed tears that, upon touching the earth, transformed into bees. Honey was used in temple offerings to please deities and to accompany the dead on their journey into the afterlife. The bee also became a powerful royal symbol. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title He of the Sedge and the Bee, quietly connecting their authority to the cosmic harmony and industriousness of the hive. In Greece, the bee held profound feminine symbolism. The priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, goddesses of fertility and wilderness, were sometimes called Melissae, or bees. These women were considered conduits, channels between the divine and mortal realms. The Oracle of Delphi, one of the most important religious centres in the ancient world, was believed by some to have originally been presided over by bee priestesses. Even the famed Pythia, the Delphic prophetess herself, was occasionally called the Delphic bee. The hive itself was often seen as a microcosm of perfect order, disciplined, selfless, and profoundly productive. Philosophers and mystics compared bee society to an ideal human society, cooperative, industrious, and reverent. The Stoics admired bees for their instinctive sense of duty. Early Christians would later subtly adopt the bee as a symbol of chastity and resurrection, noting how bees create without lust. In the magical traditions of Mesopotamia, bees were invoked in ritual purification. In some Hittite ceremonies, a live bee was released after absorbing the impurities of the community, literally carrying sin away on its tiny wings. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, used in crafting protective amulets, and embedded in magical texts for blessings and healing. The bee was more than a metaphor. It was a quiet bridge, a creature that lived in nature's hidden spaces, made golden food without killing, and stung only in quiet defence. To ancient peoples, bees weren't just miraculous, dear listener, they were mystical. To the ancient world, honey wasn't just a delicious sweetness. It was quite literally divine medicine. Long before bacteria were even discovered, people instinctively knew that honey could clean wounds, soothe persistent coughs, and even gently preserve the body. It wasn't magic, though it often felt like it. It was chemistry, centuries ahead of its formal explanation. In Egypt, honey was a cornerstone of ancient medicine. Medical papyri, like the Ebers Papyrus, dating to circa 1550 BCE, list honey in over 500 prescriptions. It was mixed with milk, figs, garlic, and various herbs to treat everything from persistent eye infections to digestive problems. When paired with animal fat or resin, it was applied as a comforting salve to burns and cuts. Doctors instinctively knew that wounds treated with honey healed faster and resisted infection, likely due to honey's natural acidity and hydrogen peroxide content. The Greeks quietly followed suit. Hippocrates, often called the father of modern medicine, prescribed honey for respiratory problems, ulcers and fatigue. He famously used honey mixed with vinegar to create oxymel, a tonic used to clear phlegm and reduce fevers. Greek athletes drank honeyed water to boost stamina during Olympic training, believing it restored strength quicker than wine or plain water alone. In India, the Ayurvedic system held honey, madhu, in high regard. It was meticulously classified by taste, source, and medicinal potency. Ayurvedic texts warned against overheating honey, but strongly endorsed it as a treatment for indigestion, colds, wounds, and even certain poisons. It was also used in religious rituals, offered to gods and consumed during sacred fasts for both spiritual and bodily cleansing. The Romans too believed deeply in the medicinal power of honey. Pliny the Elder recorded dozens of remedies involving honey in his vast natural history. It served as a base for ointments, gargles, and laxatives, and was even used to treat the wounded after battle. Honey mixed with poppy juice was gently given as a sedative. Roman surgeons kept it readily on hand to dress wounds and reduce inflammation. Beeswax had its important place in medicine too, as a stable base for plasters, balms, and even rudimentary dental fillings. Its malleability and resistance to decay made it ideal for sealing and preserving. In short, dear listener, honey in the ancient world wasn't just sweet, it was life-saving. It healed the sick, preserved the dead, and symbolized purity. It was, perhaps, the pharmacy of the gods, delivered by the quiet, diligent wings of bees. Ancient beekeepers were more than simple farmers. They were quiet innovators, meticulous engineers, and keen observers of nature. Across civilizations, they developed specialized tools and methods that allowed them to manage bee colonies effectively, harvest honey sustainably, and even protect themselves from the bees' defensive stings. One of the most important innovations was the very design of the hive itself. The Egyptians popularized the use of horizontal cylindrical clay hives, essentially large terracotta tubes stacked in rows. These hives were durable, portable, and cleverly mimicked the natural cavities where bees thrived. Similarly, the Greeks and Romans used terracotta and woven basket hives, some with removable lids to allow access to honeycombs without destroying the entire colony. The ability to inspect and harvest without killing the bees was revolutionary, quietly paving the way for modern sustainable apiculture. To safely extract honey, ancient beekeepers universally employed smoke to gently calm the bees. The Greeks invented clay smokers and bellows, ingeniously designed to direct smoke into the hive's entrance. The smoke-masking alarm pheromones released by guard bees subtly reduced their aggression. Romans refined this by burning fragrant herbs such as thyme or oregano, which soothed the bees and possibly imparted subtle flavours to the honey. Harvesting tools varied. Wooden or bronze knives were used to slice combs carefully. Sometimes honeycombs were gently pressed to extract liquid honey, and wax was melted and filtered for later use. Beekeepers often wore minimal protection, relying on profound experience and careful technique to avoid stings. Suits and gloves, you understand, were millennia away. Ancient texts quietly reveal that beekeepers also observed bee behaviour meticulously. They understood swarm cycles, seasonal patterns, and the crucial importance of moving hives to optimize nectar collection. Some cultures practiced transhumance, relocating hives to follow flowering plants' blooms, remarkably similar to modern migratory beekeeping. Additionally, honey storage was a crucial aspect of ancient beekeeping. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to store honey, protecting it from moisture and spoilage. Honey's remarkable shelf life was well known, sometimes lasting centuries sealed within tombs. Even the relationship between humans and bees was carefully managed. Rituals were often performed to appease bee spirits or gods, ensuring cooperation and avoiding misfortune. This spiritual care was as vital as the physical tools in maintaining a productive hive. In all, dear listener, ancient beekeeping was a complex blend of craftsmanship, natural science, and deep reverence. The tools and techniques they developed laid foundations that still quietly influence modern apiculture. The ancient practice of beekeeping, dear listener, laid the quiet groundwork for a profound relationship between humans and bees that continues to this very day. Far from a simple agricultural activity, early beekeeping was an intricate art and a subtle science that profoundly influenced medicine, religion, economy, and ecology across civilizations. shaping the very way we understand nature and sustainability. From the fertile Nile Valley to the rugged hills of Anatolia, from the sacred temples of Greece to the sprawling farms of Rome, ancient beekeepers meticulously honed methods to protect and sustain their colonies. Their quiet innovations in hive design, the strategic use of smoke, and their understanding of seasonal management allowed for truly sustainable honey harvests, a practice crucial for both daily survival and burgeoning trade. The respect they showed for the bees' life cycles helped foster a model of quiet harmony between humans and nature. Their instinctive understanding of honey as a medicine informed the early pharmacopoeias of Egypt, India, and Rome, subtly influencing healing practices that persist in traditional medicine worldwide. Honey's natural antibacterial and preservative properties became the quiet foundation for wound care and various remedies. While beeswax shaped early technologies in cosmetics, art, and construction, the symbolic and spiritual meanings attributed to bees and honey in ancient cultures also endure. Religious rituals honouring bees and honey continue in various traditions, reflecting humanity's ongoing fascination with the hive as a metaphor for order, cooperation, and divine blessing. The idea of bees as messengers between worlds or symbols of resurrection permeates art, literature, and folklore across centuries. Moreover, the ancient practice of migratory beekeeping, moving hives to follow floral blooms, is echoed in modern commercial agriculture, essential for crop pollination and global food production. The quiet innovations of ancient beekeepers helped set the stage for today's urgent awareness of bees as vital pollinators and the pressing environmental challenges they face. Despite centuries of technological advances, the core relationship remains unchanged. Humans profoundly depend on bees for food, for medicine, and for the delicate health of our ecosystems. And bees in turn have shaped human culture, economy, and spirituality since the dawn of civilization. The enduring legacy of ancient beekeeping is a testament to human ingenuity, a quiet respect for nature, and the enduring power of collaboration, both within the hive and between species. It reminds us, as you gently drift off, that even the smallest creatures can inspire profound science, deep faith, and the very will to survive. Sleep well.